Hello, lords and ladies. Today we're starting the Russian Revolution, and what we're going to look at first is the background of Russia prior to the revolution. So let's check it out. Today you have several different objectives. We're going to look and review the geography of Russia, go over what was going on there in terms of temperatures and landforms, all that cool geographic information. And then we're going to look at how does that geography affect the development of the country and the history of the country. We're going to look at the key leaders from Russia's past. What were they each responsible for? What were their significant contributions? What was, the things that they're known for? And then we are going to look at problems that Russia has traditionally faced. So things that have been going on in Russia for all of its history and have been ongoing problems within that nation. So these are the objectives for today. You might want to pause it if you need more time so that you can write them down. Russian geography is unique. It is somewhat diverse, and Russia had lots of challenges because of it. So again, the objectives for today is looking at the geography, looking at past leaders, and seeing what problems they've traditionally had to face and deal with over the course of their long, long history. Now, if you remember, Russia was heavily influenced by the Mongols. The Mongols took over Russia, which had been Kievan Rus and other territories, and they isolated Russia from the rest of Europe. So Russia was not a really well-developed country for many, many years because of it, because they were essentially cut off from all of the rest of Europe. So that Mongolian influence and the Byzantine influence prior to it are going to be something that is going to influence Russia tremendously. So the Byzantine brought Eastern Orthodox Christianity into the empire, and that's because of its, again, geography. It's close to the Byzantine Empire. So pause it if you think you'll need more time. But when we're talking about Russia, we're looking at an extraordinarily cold climate, particularly in the Siberian region, which is the northern part of Russia. It only has two major rivers, the Volga and the Don, and I'll show you they're located on the western portion of the country. The Ural Mountains are also in the western portion of the country, and they do provide protection from enemies, which we'll talk about and we have talked about in the past with Napoleon. Russia is very, very rich in natural resources, oil, minerals, all kinds of resources that Russia is rich in. They have good timber. However, to the north, they have the Arctic Ocean, and this ocean is typically ice-bound. Their difficulty is in that last point that you saw there, the lack of warm water ports, the fact that they have no access to a warm water port for much of their history is really going to drive them to want to access one, and the only way they can really seek to do that is through expansion. So that lack of warm water port, a place where they can easily trade, is really going to push the drive for expansion and imperialism, that kind of thing. This is a map of Russia that you can see. Siberia, very, very cold. Moscow, capital city. Ural Mountains just to the other side of that. And again, you see most of it's on the Arctic Circle. So not a whole lot of livable space in Russia. So taking a look at this map, you should see most people are going to be concentrated living in the west and the southeastern parts of Russia. This is the Volga and the Don. You can see they're coming right off of the Black and Caspian Seas respectively. And those are going to be the main access to trade routes that the Russians are going to even have. Okay, so you see those there. These are the Ural Mountains. You can see that they are imposing and difficult traveling, especially for armies, like we saw with Napoleon. So they do provide and afford Russia some amount of protection. Okay, how is Russia ruled? Throughout its history, Russia was typically, up until the time that we're going to talk about the Russian Revolution, they were autocratic. That was a government ruled by one. Auto one, government, crazy, right? So rule by one. And that person, or a small group of people, sometimes, has absolute authority. They called their ruler the Tsar. Look at that, Caesar. Alright? You see the Roman/Byzantine influence based on that. The Byzantine Empire, again, was the eastern half of the Roman Empire. And you see that leader is Caesar, right? So Tsar. You can see Tsar spelled either way. You can pause it if you need more time. But they traditionally called their leaders the Tsar. The women would be the Tsarina. So when you have an autocratic government, the people tend to not really have much power, as we know. It means that the power is concentrated in the hands of the leader. So the Russian people have been living as oppressed people for much of their history. It was not unnatural to them. Often they called the Tsar their little father. So he was viewed as a father figure type person. Now, I want to just run quickly through a few of the important Tsars of the past. You can pause it to write. The first one I'll call to your attention is Ivan IV, who is otherwise known as Ivan the Terrible. He gets that name for good reason. He ruled through terror. He kept people, anybody who went even slightly against him would be killed. He made the serfs, the feudalism in Russia, more permanent by tying the serfs to the land in the mid-1500s. Ivan IV actually killed his own son. He hit him so hard that he induced brain damage and the kid died. So Ivan the Terrible was a tyrant and got his name, and there's a picture of Ivan the Terrible, albeit an artist rendering, slightly exaggerated, but that is an artist rendering of Tsar Ivan IV. Okay, another one of note that we want to look at. Okay, another Tsar that we want to look at is from the 17th century, 1689, as opposed to the 16th century that we saw with Tsar Ivan the Terrible. Pause it if you need to write. Well, when you need for writing. Peter the Great ruled starting in 1689. He did try to make some reforms, hence his name Peter the Great. However, to get the kinds of economic trade reforms that he wanted, he had to increase serfdom. That was not good for the peasantry of Russia. And he also westernized, or attempted to westernize the country, bring in more ideas from Britain and France, and really try to make those ideas stick in his country. And that's Peter there. Again, artist rendering of Peter the Great. But he, again, westernization, okay, is what he's famous for. The next individual, too, is famous for westernizing Russia and actually gaining access to a warm water port on the Black Sea, and that is Catherine the Great. She was one of the enlightened despots. We did talk about her, 1760, so we're in the 18th century here. She expanded Russia's borders in order to get them a warm water port. So she took Russia all the way to the Black Sea, and that won her great amount of affection. However, Catherine the Great, and you can pause it if you're writing, she did try to westernize, especially with the Enlightenment ideas that we talked about, but she wouldn't do anything that would threaten her power. She also was not necessarily super popular with the people. Her husband met an untimely end that many suspect was at her hands, and she was a bit distrusted by the Russian people. So, even though they recognized how many great things she did, they also did not necessarily respect her. So it is more difficult, I think, when you're looking at her situation than, say, Peter the Great. Okay, the next and final Tsar that we'll review is Alexander II. He was the Tsar about 100 years after Catherine. And again, these guys are all Romanovs, by the way. Russia had been ruled by Romanovs for about 300 years prior to this Russian Revolution. So Alexander the Great or Alexander II, sorry about that. He should remind you, pause it if you need to. He should remind you of someone from the United States, in that he freed the serfs in the 1860s. He issued the Emancipation Edict to do so, and this was 2 years prior to Abraham Lincoln doing it in our country. So Alexander II is there, and again, freeing the serfs, Emancipation Edict, that's his main contribution to Russian history. Not necessarily loved by the nobility, obviously, because they counted on those serfs to work for them. Okay, so you got a little bit of a taste of what Russia was all about. Now what we want to look at is what are the problems that Russia is facing or has faced throughout this time in history. And they have faced a tremendous amount of them. First, what do we do with all of these peasants? It's largely a peasant society, and they're unskilled, they don't have much to do, they don't own the land. What do we do with them, and how many of them is it going to take to actually rebel against us, and you know, what happens? Pause it if you think you'll need more time. How do we deal with radical socialists? Because when you have so many poor people, and you have so many people who don't own anything or have anything, they are going to be attracted to the idea that everybody should own everything. And how do we handle these people and keep them at bay and keep our system of government in? How do we industrialize Russia? Russia is behind. It's behind all the other countries in Europe. And, you know, how do we get back on site and start to make progress so that we're more like these other nations? How do we increase our trade with the Western nations? And why are the idea that they have so many different nationalities, why might that be a problem? Think about what we've talked about. You have White Russians, Belarusians, you have Georgians, Azerbaijanis, you have all kinds of different ethnic groups in Russia. Ukrainians, Poles, I mean, you're going to see tons of different ethnic groups. Why is that going to cause issues? Think about it. Okay, we've talked about nationalism, the people wanting to get their own countries. Those are the types of things that you should think about when you're thinking about why too many nationalities can lead to trouble. So, we will talk more about the Russian Rev in the coming days, and I hope you have a good evening. Thanks.